Welcome to Community Conversations. This is our fourth panel this month for October. We are lucky to have some amazing folks here with us today. We are going to be focusing on our LGBTQ plus community, and I am super excited. But before we get into that, I'm going to have Dr. Krisafi go ahead and introduce health promotion because they sign our checks and it's important that we talk about them on tonight. And then I'll come back and I'll introduce myself and then we'll get right into the panel.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jasmine. My name is Denise Krisafi. I am a coordinator here in the Health Promotion Office, focusing on interpersonal violence prevention, and we are located within the offices of the Dean of Student Life on the Texas A&M campus here in College Station. So a little bit about health promotion and what we do. So our mission is really to empower all Aggies to embrace a culture of holistic well-being, to really help them really achieve goals professionally, personally, and academically. So the way that we do this is through prevention education and health education. And we focus primarily on interpersonal violence prevention, alcohol and other drug prevention education, and then 8 dimensions of wellness and how a lot of these public health issues that impact our students really overlap and intersect with each other.
Thanks, Dr. Krisafi. Again, my name is Jasmine Jones, and I'm a health promotion specialist here in the Office of Health Promotion, and I specialize in interpersonal violence prevention. I have spearheaded the Domestic Violence Prevention Aware Month efforts, and I am really just happy that you all are here. And so the purpose of this panel tonight in particular is this is a community that's very near and dear to me and Denise's heart. And so that's the first thing. So that really that passion that's intersecting with our purpose. And so being able to have these conversations, also knowing that our LGBTQ plus community is being impacted by dating and domestic violence at the same rates or higher as our folks that are cisgender folks, but we aren't having those conversations. And it's really taboo within communities. And then when we think about race and that intersectionality piece, we think about our trans brothers and sisters and what that looks like and what that feels like for them. So really creating a space where we can have those conversations, also where we can just be a resource for those that need this information that are maybe just scared to even reach out, or they're trying to figure out what's happening in their relationship. And so that's why we're here and really bringing that awareness, because a lot of folks assume that when we talk about dating and domestic violence, that it only happens in heterosexual relationships. And you would think that we have come far enough where people don't think that anymore, but you'd be surprised. And so tonight, we really want to dive in deep and have that conversation. We have some experts in the field on our panel. And so I think tonight is going to be a very dynamic and rich conversation. And so before we get into our discussion, because I know that's what you all are here for, we're going to introduce our panelists. And so Dr. Krisafi and I will go back and forth introducing them, and then we'll get right into our discussions. So Dr. Krisafi, take it away.
Great. So I get the pleasure of introducing Dr. Matt Hoffman. So I'm going to go ahead and read his bio here. So Dr. Matt Hoffman is a family nurse practitioner and has taught at Texas A&M University in the College of Nursing since 2012 in undergraduate and graduate programs. Within the College of Nursing, he has served as the inaugural faculty chair, in addition to serving among TAMU committees and organizations, including Faculty Senate Caucus, Sexual Assault Survivor Services Committee, and the LGBTQ plus Pride Center, among others. Dr. Hoffman's professional research experiences include local and national meetings and conferences, most notably for his work on creating psychologically healthy work. Sorry, I lost my place. We're going to start over on that sentence. Dr. Hoffman's professional research experiences include local and national meetings and conferences, most notably for his work on creating psychologically healthy work environments and the use of policy models in nursing. He is a member of Sigma Theta Tau International Nursing Honor Society, the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, Gay and Lesbian Medical Association, National Organization of Nurse Practitioner Faculties, National League for Nursing, Brazos Valley Nurse Practitioners Association, and is a lifetime legacy member of Texas Nurse Practitioners. In addition to membership duties, he also served in previous leadership roles as secretary for the Phi Iota chapter of Sigma Theta Tau, president of the Brazos Valley Nurse Practitioners Association, and president for Aggie Allies. In 2020, he was announced as the Phyllis R. Fry Advocacy Award winner for his work done at Texas A&M and within the local community towards the acceptance and nurturance of transgender faculty, staff, and students. Dr. Hoffman teaches advanced pharmacology, advanced pathophysiology, primary care of families, and practices in a family practice clinic in Bryan, Texas. Wow, super accomplished. Yes, so Dr. Hoffman, tell us a little bit, this is lovely, but tell us a little bit more too about who you are and what you do by way of Texas A&M University.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, I think the bio definitely makes me sound a little bit more than what I feel most days, but that's me on my best day, maybe. I am, as the bio mentioned, in the College of Nursing, and a lot of what I've done locally within the community is really to help support a lot of the hidden patient populations that we sometimes see. The LGBT patient population is obviously a really big one, but when we start talking about some of these more subtle, nuanced, when we talk about interpartner violence, that's definitely a sub community that, as Jasmine mentioned, can be taboo and is a little bit more sensitive of a topic to talk about. So I try to make sure that anything that I do, whether it be in my university role or professionally, is really highlighting and advocating for and bringing a spotlight on the resources and availability or lack thereof in resources for a lot of variety of different patient populations. So I do what I can, but I'm so glad to be on this panel with all of these amazing people that are also doing the same march as I am. So it's great to be here. Thank you all.
And we are really happy to have you here. So thank you so much. Great.
All right, so I get to introduce Frances Jackson. So Frances Jackson is the coordinator of the LGBTQ plus Pride Center in the Office of the Dean of Student Life at Texas A&M University. They present nationally at LGB student experiences, transgender and non-binary student experiences, and strategies for allyship. Frances formerly worked in residence life at the State University of New York College. Yes, don't want to mess that up. At Antiana. Frankie says that all the time, y'all, to me, and I still messed it up. And the State University of New York at Binghamton as a hall director. They earned their master's in college student personnel administration from, I'm not saying that, in 2016. And so Frankie, first of all, let me tell you all about Frankie before they start talking. They are one of my people at the university, and they surely help me when I have questions and concerns. And I love that we have that type of relationship because it's all about supporting our students holistically. We also presented at a conference recently about campus resources through a cross-cultural lens. And we were actually the best in Texas out of 22 other presentations. So it was kind of a big deal. And so I enjoy working with them, and I'm really lucky to have the pleasure to call them my friend. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and tell us where you got your master's degree from? Because Jasmine was not going to butcher another one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jazz. I got my bachelor's and my master's from Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. It is a small private Jesuit school, and a lot of my philosophy comes from that cura personalis, which is Latin for care of the whole person. I worked at Oneonta, which is a school in the Capital District up in New York. So serving both rural and urban populations has been something that I've been really passionate about. I came to Texas A&M a little over a year ago and just, dove in and experienced all that there was. There were things that I was ready for, and there were things that I was not. Serving a very different Southern population and sort of getting up to speed culturally, and I still am, right? Like, we're always learning about other folks and how we can serve them better. So my primary focus here at the university is the student population, but I also do work with faculty staff in looking at policies and trying to help make things more inclusive. And then I also get to do some work with Katrina and Matt. Katrina here, we'll talk about her in a minute, but her organization, Pride Community Center, does a really great job serving the Brazos Valley. So I like to say we're sibling organizations and we work really hard on that. And then I get to do some LGBT health disparity work when Matt has some free time. So that's been really rad. Thank you.
Okay, so I now get the pleasure to introduce Katrina Stewart. So Katrina Dawn Stewart is a bisexual trans woman who's been involved in LGBTQ plus advocacy and education, as well as event building and organizational leadership since 2001 at the local, state, and national level. Her favorite work is education and advocacy on the ground and an outreach paradigm. She has also been the LGBTQ plus and transgender client preparedness trainer for the Sexual Assault Resource Center of Brazos Valley since 2007, as well as the state conventions for TASA and National Sexual Assault Conference. She has provided coalition-based same-sex interpersonal violence workshops and is invested in the impact of IPV on the LGBTQ plus community. She has been involved in the Aggie Allies program in varying capacities, but most often as the Aggie Allies Diversity Awards representative since 2004. Currently, she serves as the volunteer executive director for Pride Community Center, serving the Brazos County and over 5 neighboring counties. Welcome, Katrina. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work here in the community.
Cause as much trouble as possible, while at the same time raising the level of LGBT understanding and getting us to really live into that idea of community by not only LGBT people engaging in the community, but kind of coaching the community on our lives. I have a little dachshund who you may occasionally hear in the background here. She had a squeaker last time I looked. And she is my pride and joy and my buddy.
Thanks, Katrina. We look forward to hearing from you tonight. And so last but certainly not least, I get to introduce Brandon. And so I'm going to read Brandon's bio to you, and then I'll tell y'all something special about Brandon, perhaps. So Brandon Maurice Wright is the program coordinator for the Chicago Black Men's Caucus. In partnership with the Chicago Department of Public Health, Brandon has been able to envision and implement innovative programs tailored for the Black SGL community, such as Conversations with the Caucus and the Community Consultation Conference. Along with programming and curating cultural events, he has also developed and disseminated a community assessment to ensure the health and wellness of Black queer men in the Chicagoland. And so I am so happy to have Brandon on the panel. We grew up together, and it has been a pleasure watching him grow and evolve into his gift and really finding his passion and his purpose in life. And so Brandon, do you want to tell us more about yourself and what you do? Please.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm like clicking hard on the iPad. But yes, my name is, first of all, thank you, Jasmine, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Texas A&M for giving me the opportunity to just speak with you guys and talk about this point of conversation today. I work at the Chicago Black Men's Caucus. I stumbled upon public health. I started off as a volunteer. I was volunteer for 2 years and now staffing for 3. So going on 4. So yeah, this is exciting. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be talking to you guys this evening. And yes, Jasmine, we go way, way, way back, diapers. We go back to the diapers, so yes.
All right, y'all. So I think we're going to have a great discussion tonight. Also, I hope that you all feel the sarcasm and the energy and the vibe that the panelists are bringing to you all tonight, because it is as authentic as it's going to get. And I love it. I love to see it. And that's where we're at with that. And so we are going to get into our panel, our discussion questions. And so if you are watching our panel and you have any questions that you don't want to ask in the chat, there will be an anonymous link where you can submit questions, and those will be answered by our panelists. Also, if you feel comfortable, feel free to put your questions in the chat as well, and we will answer those in real time. And so every panel we start off with the same question. And so even before we start with that question, y'all, everyone does not have to answer each question. I know that all of you all are dynamic and you have a lot to offer. And so some of these questions I want certain folks to answer, and I'm sure you all will figure it out once I start asking them. And so we'll do the general questions first, and then I have specific questions that I'll ask each one of our panelists. And so Dr. Krisafi and I will go back and forth with the questions. And that's kind of how this is going to work for the next hour and a half or so. If we don't receive any questions from our audience, we'll just keep talking and things will be fine. So our first question, we've asked this at every panel because this is how we like to start things off. So domestic violence is a public health issue, but it's not typically viewed as such. What are some reasons you believe that domestic violence is not seen as a public health issue? And when you all answer that question, can you all give us a brief definition of how you define dating or domestic violence or intimate partner violence? How would you define that when you answer that?
I'll take a jump in. So I'm just stabbing in the dark here on that definition, because it's right. It's a mushy definition. So it would be violence visited upon someone who you are dating or in some sort of relationship with. Could be very intimate, could be less intimate, but it's that sort of relationship in which violence occurs. I think I'm going to jump in from a perspective of why in the LGBT community we may not talk about this. And I think it has a lot to do with, back when I did a same-sex domestic violence workshop in the Brazos Valley, the concern in the community was, no, you can't talk about that. If you talk about that, then people will realize it's an issue, and that will be used as fodder or evidence by those against us to create greater stigma, to persecute us more. So it's some of it, I think, goes back to that us them sort of problem of if we admit to these very real topics that need to be discussed in our community, other people will use it against us. And I think instead we need to take a different perspective and not see it always as that way, as if we address it, we can address it for everyone and lift everyone up.
Thanks, Katrina. I guess I'll hop in here. So for me, so there's the textbook definition of what domestic violence is, but what I tend to define it as is one party exerting power and control over another one. Because, I think there are things like financial abuse and other stuff that gets left out of that definition a lot of the time. And so that's sort of how I define it. Why I think it's not considered a public health, it is, but why it's not considered all the time, especially for the queer community, is there's this pressure to have these perfect hallmark relationships. There is such little LGBT representation, and so we oftentimes have to seek representation from our elders and our peers. And so, we have to have these happy, healthy relationships because there've been so much taboo and, negative stereotyping and stuff that if you lose face or let people see that things are not perfect, then, like rights could be taken away or like your relationship is therefore less valid or stuff like that. And so I think some of it comes down to this perceived notion that there has to be, like role modeling and other stuff, and people can't be less than perfect, among other reasons.
Yeah, I think if we put you guys' definitions together, I think that would be pretty on point. But I want to kind of comment on why it's not necessarily a public health issue. Well, it is a public health issue, but why it's not acknowledged the top tier to being a public health issue. I know that when you're trying to unpack domestic violence at times, I know a lot of people within education and also just dealing with, you don't really recognize all the different type of forms and all the different takes that it can take within domestic violence and different things, like you said, financial, emotional, mental abuse, besides just the physicality abuse, the physical abuse. And sometimes when you can't put a pin on things, it kind of makes it a little bit harder to talk about or to discuss within smaller or larger groups. So I know that there's a level of work that needs to be done within that, because as we unpack and understand all these other variables to domestic violence, there's a level of work that goes along with it. So I know Texas A&M is doing that work, but everybody else needs to do the same. So yeah.
Okay, I was having problems muting, and Jasmine, I know you said that we didn't all have to answer, but I'm going to jump in anyway. So the thing that I would really just echo is what was said, especially with Frankie, the power dynamic, how there's a really just largely unjust shift in that power that ideally would be shared and equal among partners. And as Frankie had pointed out, can be financial, emotional, physical, etc. But I think the only thing, and this is probably my healthcare clinician that comes out, that really kind of makes domestic violence not necessarily seem on the forefront is my lens would be to think that public health issues are something that are globally shared, whereas individuals may be more inclined to think, well, that doesn't affect me, so it's not a public health issue. And so it's kind of almost a narrow lens that some people might perceive it, because, you know, we think about the pandemic that we're experiencing. We're going into flu season. That's easily a public health issue when we're not in a pandemic. But I think that, you know, that's something where people are more inclined to think, okay, I might be exposed to the flu season, but not necessarily think I might be exposed to inter-partner violence or domestic violence. And no one's exempt. So I think, again, it's just one of those things where it's just kind of a narrow lens that some people may approach it with.
Absolutely. And so I want to thank you all for answering that first question. And you all brought up really good points. And so, Dr. Hoffman, I always believe, and I think me and Denise have had lots of conversations about this, of folks, they understand if someone has diabetes or if they have high blood pressure, if they have, you know, these those types of diseases. But when we talk about domestic violence, they're like, well, that doesn't, it's not the same. And so we have this great diagram that we use where we put domestic violence in the middle, and it's the typical public health like web. And so we talk to folks about, okay, if you experience domestic violence, what can you, the non-communicable diseases you can experience. We talk about infant mortality and those types of things. We talk about high-risk behaviors that folks may experience because they have been impacted by dating and domestic violence. And it always blows my mind that when children are impacted by dating and domestic violence, the impact that it has on their life, or even youth, and how people are like, oh, this is not a public health issue. And it's like, our children, y'all, they are really our future. And so even with that, using that mind frame, and then you all, Katrina and Frankie and Brandon, you highlighted just the different types of violence that exists. And I think it's really important to know that, because it's more than just physical violence. And when you're having conversations with folks, especially when your identities intersect. So as a Black woman, you know, if I experience dating and domestic violence, I not only have to navigate the space as a woman, but then I also have to navigate the space as a Black woman. And what does that mean? And so I think that intersectionality piece is huge. When we are trying to have these conversations. And I think we'll get there today as we talk, but you all brought up these great points about domestic violence. And so I want to thank you all, but I am passing the torch over, and I'm so happy y'all didn't answer the next question, because I was like, uh-oh, they gonna answer it, but it's coming. It's a good one.
All right, so our next question, actually, Katrina, you were the first one to mention this in your response a little bit, but we're going to dig a little bit more into the specifics of this answer. And again, this is for anyone who wants to jump in with it. But so we talked a little bit about domestic violence being a taboo subject, right, or something that gets that really gets hushed in terms of our community conversations. So how do you create spaces for individuals to be able to talk about domestic violence and intimate partner violence and all of the different type of abuses that happen within their communities?
So earlier I mentioned I cause trouble, and of course I said that as a joke, but there's an element of truth to it, and there's an element of this to it. You cause trouble in that you bring up the unspeakable and you talk about it boldly, whether it is just with your friend or on social media. You have to begin the conversation somewhere, and that needs to not only be all of us individually, but we need our leaders, those we look up to, as Frankie was kind of referencing earlier, to also tackle this subject and to bring it up in public discourse.
I think for me, it's kind of easier for me to answer this, especially from a clinical standpoint. It's definitely one of the components that we teach our students, both undergraduate nurses as well as graduate nurses that are going into advanced nursing roles, such as family nurse practitioners. We are trained to detect as well as screen. So screening is just a routine thing, the way that, you know, we're all essentially being screened for COVID. I promise not to be looping everything back to COVID and pandemic throughout the whole time, but you know, just basic screening is one element. And I think that one of the great things that comes with time is being able to get to know and build rapport and build relationships with individuals as clinicians. And that's one of the things that makes it a bit easier, but also makes it difficult as a caring human being whenever you identify potential signs of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And again, it's one of those things where trying to normalize and advocate and really just, as Katrina had mentioned, just speak it, put it out there. It may be a little bit bristly or prickly or uncomfortable initially, but it's on somebody's radar that you're comfortable talking about it and they can potentially come to you if they needed to. So again, from a clinical standpoint, it's something that's inherently built into clinicians regardless of the specific healthcare arena. But I think that as advocates, that's another way that by us talking and just putting it out there is one way that we can open up more doors for communication.
If I could piggyback off of what Dr. Hoffman said on a community kind of like lines per se, really checking in or just kind of having this conversation about holistic health is a huge indicator of really anything that could possibly be going on, or any type of thing where if you could like pivot a service or anything, just really checking on the mind, the body, the spiritual, everything like that within a person can discover, or you can talk about these different type of things that you may know or have indications or that you may not. So I would just say like checking in with the holistic person would definitely be an approach or a tactic, I should say, with starting conversation.
All right, I'm giving it just a, oh, I'm sorry, Frankie, yes.
So I want to echo everything that was said about education and other stuff. I think one other thing is just being present in spaces. You know, as you know, Katrina has done this, but being at those meetings and being present and just being there for folks, I think puts a name and a face to that stuff. And so when someone is ready to come and talk to you about things, they already know who they're going to and that you are a safe space. So just showing up for folks can be as simple as that. And then when they're ready, they'll let you know.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I'm really a huge fan, honestly, of coordinated community response, but we know even with that there are still ever-present challenges to it, right? In terms of who's really an ally and who isn't, and bringing bias into that space too in terms of a response process. But I really love what you all are talking about in terms of empowerment in different spaces, because I oftentimes personally, just through my lens, feel like and we were talking a little bit about this last week, that when we talk about specific populations of people, we tend to kind of relegate it to liberal urban areas, right? And we have a lot of individuals all over different communities, what they define as their community, which may not fit into that lens, right? Who are needing to talk about this. And so I'm just going to echo that I appreciate all the work that you're doing in different spaces, because even at my short time at Texas A&M here now, I've seen the shift that has been happening with, you know, we still have obviously a lot of challenges, but where I know it came from through conversations that I had had with other staff and students here, even 5 years ago to where it is now, that we've made a lot of progress. So I appreciate you all causing good trouble. I'll later on maybe send a link. There's a really good book called Good Trouble in case anybody's interested in that. So I will put that in the link in the box later tonight for anybody who wants to read it. But thank you all so much for sharing.
All right, so we're jumping into a deeper question in my eyes, and so we're gonna talk about outing. I think outing is something where it's a lot more common in the community, and people don't talk about it as a form of abuse, and so that's where we're going. And so the first question that I'm gonna ask you all, so domestic violence, and we've mentioned this already, but just to reiterate. Domestic violence consists of financial abuse, technological abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and stalking. So, how can outing be a form of emotional abuse? And so, we're going to talk through that. And then I have 2 questions for you all that I want you all to answer. So, the first question: how have you seen outing used as a tactic to hurt their partner, for someone to hurt their partner by exposing them to their family, friends, or colleagues? Okay, so that's the first one. And then, how have you seen someone's HIV status being outed as a way to hurt their partner or just to hurt them? And so it's 2 different questions. You all can choose which one you want to answer, and I also can reiterate or repeat the question if y'all forget. Okay.
I am here for this. I don't know if you noticed, like my posture got already because I'm all about this. So first, I want to step back and say that the outing aspect is not just a intimate partner type of thing. We see this occurring beyond like those close intimate relationships. And that's what really gets me fired up, is people that have zero business doing that, causing horrific, just really, really unfortunate circumstances. So it gets my blood pressure is going right now. So I'll rein it back in, Matt. So the thing is, the emotional ramifications from that can be devastating. Whether, we sometimes more commonly hear outing as someone that came out of the closet. That's an experience that's an individual's own. Their lived experience that should be on their terms. So it's taking something away. And it is one of the grossest and most egregious violations I can think of. Sorry, it's really it gets me. I think the reason why it gets me so much is I've seen the impacts that it's had on individuals, just from malice and spite, and it's never okay. And fortunately, I cannot think of a single instance where I've seen a individual do this to their partner. That's not to say that it's not happened and I wasn't aware, but it's just something that I think that the professional and personal strain that it puts on an individual emotionally, we're destroying trust, we're destroying relationships and connections to people that may never be able to be the same again if they can be regained. But to move to the next point with regards to the outing of someone's HIV status, I tend to be a little bit more optimistic about this one, which we need it because that first one got me. I feel like I don't see this as much, I guess, lately. I feel like I'm more hopeful of the fact that we've given more power to knowing your HIV status. So that way people are not ashamed to be positive. People are not ashamed to say, I'm HIV negative, I got tested. I think that we've kind of broken down some of that stigma. Again, I'm optimistic in that regard, but again, it's not something that I've typically seen or experienced too much, because a lot of people just kind of own that aspect. And again, the overall diagnosis and prognosis rather of HIV is not as grim as it initially used to be. Granted, there's a whole lot of baggage that still comes along with it, but I do tend to be a little bit more hopeful with that one. So thank you for your time with that. Sorry. I love the questions.
I'm gonna
I'd like to
hop in. Oh,
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Francis. Go
Are
ahead.
you sure?
Yes.
All right. We're all very fired up about this. That's why we're jumping all over each other. I wanted to challenge the premise of this question a little bit. So when you read it, you talked about how outing is a form of emotional abuse. And I would say outing is a form of all abuse. Outing can lead to withdrawal of finances from parents. It can lead to being kicked out of someone's house. Like, if you don't come out, I'm gonna, kick you out. It can lead to, when you think about the family aspect and you think about people here in Texas, conversion therapy is not illegal. And so we have students who come in who have been exposed to conversion therapy and so have gone back in the closet or fear conversion therapy. And conversion therapy, for folks who are listening at home who don't know, is any sort of pseudo therapy that tries to get someone to not be gay or transgender. And so that can be talk therapy, pills, physical abuse, like the whole gambit. And that is not illegal in the state of Texas. And so outing can lead to all of those things. And so I would say that it can be a form of emotional abuse, but it can be a form of all abuse. And then how have I seen it used as a tactic to hurt friends and family? I used to see it as like, oh, by you not being out, like, and so partners pressuring other partners to come out was something I saw a lot growing up, which was really unfortunate. But it can lead to like friends and family cutting you off and not being welcome. It's not, you don't need to be out to everyone. Like, if that's what you want, by all means, but it's your choice, and it should be your choice, because it's not always. If and when you come out to folks, because maybe grandma never needs to know, and that's your right to never tell grandma, because it doesn't affect, you're not ready to have it affect that relationship, but you may be ready. And so that like pressure, it can lead to being cut off from family and all sorts of other things. So that's sort of my take on it. And the HIV status, I would echo Matt. I'm not saying that people don't do that, but I think a lot of what I saw in the clubs and stuff, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this because I work at A&M, but was a lot of people being really responsible about being like, let me pull up my test results on my phone and show you, like, look, like, I'm good. And so like definitely a bit of like pride there, but I would say that's what I've experienced and what I've seen. That's not to say it's everyone's experience around HIV.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of attest, I guess, to what we both said. I think that it's great to hear that Texas A&M are taking those definite like strides when it comes to HIV statuses and having those open dialogues, and everyone's talking about destigmatizing HIV. But I'm going to switch my hat here, because yes, I do work for Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus, but I am from Gary, Indiana, where we are an hour away, but there's a little bit of difference in a couple of things, and it's just real. But to give the example to, how these things have kind of looked around for HIV within outing and things, I have been in circles or have witnessed folks that it wasn't into into relationship, relationship. I'm trying to get that right. I don't think I'm saying that or butchering it wrong. But it wasn't a romantic relationship within other folks, but it's been other folks who have outed or said things on behalf of other folks, saying like, just for example, like, we're kikiing, we're having a good time, and someone says they're dating somebody and they're like, oh, did you know that they're positive? Like, what are you doing with that? And you're just sitting here like, well, what are you doing by disclosing this person's status? And that being the domestic violence in that case. So I've seen it in a couple of different ways, as it being in the personal relationship violence, but also in, I guess, like in a community or just in a bigger lens to talking about people's and outing HIV statuses. So it does, I think, in this little land over here still necessarily goes on, but that also comes in with the lack of education and stuff. Because I believe that when those things come about, when people are in those community settings, I've also been taught this too, was that it was a personal view of protection, more so than me saying like, oh, I'm just outing this person because it's their business and I'm trying to, just be shady. But no, it was more so of like, well, they didn't know, so I wanted to tell them. But it's like that's still an entanglement. Oh, entanglement. That's still entanglement inside of someone's mind about HIV and what HIV status is and disclosure and all those stuff mean. So I think there's just a lot more education, a lot more different things that needs to go on within that conversation for a community as well.
Brandon, as I hear what you're saying, I really think back to personal power, right? And being able to share your story your way and take that power. And so much of what you're saying and what we're reflected here um, really illustrates the negative side effects of outing someone. For me, when you asked this question, I actually flipped it in my head. And I flipped it in this way. For me, in a relationship I had, even though the other person was out in many spaces, the idea of them not being out in some spaces is what they used as a control mechanism to keep me from being around other friends. So I would just, there are interesting ways in which people who want to manipulate another person use those sort of things, right? Um, and so I just wanted to bring that up, and along with that, I wanted to address this. I think it's a appropriate time to address it, and that is the whole down low thing of, for instance, straight guys dating trans women, and the whole outing not outing thing there. Um, yes, when you're in a relationship like that, you don't want to out them. At the same time, the flip side of that is so much violence and so much bad things happen because we don't have enough of our straight men who love trans women and trans women of color um, owning that and realizing they are part of our community. So I hope that didn't muddy the waters too much, but I just wanted to illustrate that it can also be used as a tool of oppression.
So thank y'all, first of all, because y'all are brilliant. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the way each one of you all interpreted the question, and you gave me such rich answers and responses. And I mentioned this before we got on, is that every time I have these panels, my panelists do exactly what I want their minds to do. And so I appreciate that. And I think, Katrina, that flip side, I heard you talking about that, and I'm like, wow, because we saw that play out. It's something that is common that does happen with that power differential, because we know that any form of interpersonal violence is about power and control. We know that. So I want to control this other person, and so that was a great point to bring up, Francis. You are always the history. That's what they do. So I was prepared for that. And so thank you for really shedding light on Texas as a whole, and really talking about the things that are happening here. And I find it funny because Brandon's like, well, it's not. And it's like, yeah, comprehensive sexual health education does not happen in Texas either, just like it doesn't happen in Indiana. And when we think about our LGBTQ plus education, not so much either. And so I think, even with me being from Indiana, and thinking about the different things that I saw there, living there when we had an HIV epidemic that happened, and knowing that these folks got it from intravenous drug use, and really having those conversations about HIV, and that looked different. And so it's a question I always ask because I'm curious, because I'm learning. These panels allow me to learn as well. And so I'm happy that y'all are fired up about that question, because I have saw folks be outed and it's ruined their lives. And I think that you deserve that autonomy and that power to really be able to share your own experiences. And so, Dr. Safi, you want to go to our next question for me? We don't have any questions that have been submitted just yet in the chat or in the form, but we'll go ahead and post that link again if you all have any anonymous questions that you'd like to ask.
Hey, thanks, Jasmine. So our next question is, domestic violence is impacting the LGBTQ plus community at alarming rates. In your opinion, what are the barriers that individuals face when accessing support and resources?
Yeah, so I would start off by saying the police. We know from studies that gay men believe that if they were to report that their boyfriend hit them, that they would be less likely to be believed by cops. We know trans women of color experience alarming rates of violence at the hands of police while in custody or when reporting stuff, they're not taken seriously. They report high rates of sexual assault, battery, and other stuff when in and around police officers. So, and that it's not a political statement, those are just what we know the statistics bear out. And so I would say that one of the barriers of reaching resources is that people then know these things and then are much less likely to go to the places where they're supposed to be going because they fear that they will continue being abused.
I echo what Frankie had said. When we talk about how the numbers are increasing, I mean, the studies out there are showing that bisexual and transgender individuals are at an increased risk for interpartner violence compared to cis, lesbian, gay, and straight individuals. So it's one of those things where it's out there and it exists, but we are seeing a large number of official underreporting because of these reasons there. And everyone's just different in their, I guess, geographic region. Let's take that. So I love that Frankie comes with both the rural and urban types of perspectives. College Station, Bryan College Station is not small, but we are definitely not a metropolitan area. And in situations like this, where I have had actual patients and clients, as a healthcare provider, I am a mandatory reporter for issues along these lines. And so it's one of those things where, for me personally, the lack of resources that we have here or the lack of means to access are definitely a couple of the specific barriers I've seen here in Bryan College Station. I've had many conversations where, just trying to network and find out, okay, who can this individual go to based on these factors? And the unfortunate part is when you start approaching that, then you have this nice list of, okay, well, do they meet this criteria? Did this happen? Did this? Are they this? And there are just so many barriers that end up stacking up whenever we look at some of these resources that are intended to be beneficial. They're not, sometimes they're a barrier in and of themselves, especially when getting someone in a door to a safe place. And so it's an unfortunate thing. I'm hopeful. I mean, obviously I know of resources in larger areas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, et cetera. But here in Bryan College Station, an hour and a half to 2 hours away from some of these places, if you already are experiencing some of these financial power imbalances that we have alluded to earlier, you're not going to be able to get there. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I second what Dr. Hoffman said, and also Frankie. I mean, like I said, going back to the Gary mentality of living in the city of Gary to Chicago, I know that it's an hour between time of trying to receive services, especially tailored services. I just knowing the map of Gary, Indiana, a lot of the domestic violence or services that are provided are for women, which are great. But when it comes down to, LGBTQ plus, even Black cis men, different things like that, we do have to go a hop, skip, and away for certain tailored services just to talk to someone or just to look at someone who knows exactly what I'm going through and who can actually help me without all the service, barriers. And like you said, making a whole green book, that's a work within itself. In a perfect world, we would love for all this to just be at our hands and at our feet. But just got to continue to work to do that. So yeah, thank you both for bringing up those points. Mm-hmm.
So Jasmine, you've been through the training I do for SARC advocates, so you know the checklist of these sort of barriers I go through. So if I can mention some of those and kind of tease some of them out. Thank you, Frankie, for bringing up law enforcement. That's a big one. Matt, you know all too well, the healthcare system itself is both a help and a hindrance. And you have done such amazing work in addressing the ignorance in LGBT health and trying to change some of that stigma. And I thank you for that. We also have to look at community size. And in this area, you most likely know who the perpetrator and the victim are. And so for a victim to speak up, they are then outing that behavior to someone else, and they're running not only community repercussions for them personally, but but community repercussions for the perpetrator that maybe is not in line with what they want. They just want it to stop. They don't want to ruin the person's life. And the final thing that I have noticed, and I love going to conferences, I love educating at conferences, and we have a great one locally, every victim, every time. But the other thing I love about conferences is you get to see people raw where they are at in their understandings. And there's a lot of misinformation out there among victim services providers. I've heard things from all the way from trans women shouldn't use the bathroom other women use. Of course, you've all heard that, to BDSM leads to sexual assault by and of itself, to sexual violence can turn someone gay. Lots of vague ideas that people really do not sit down and question, and those stick in these providers' minds, and they're a record groove that when someone comes in, they're victim service providers. They're some of the most giving people that you can meet, but nevertheless, that groove is already in their mind and affects how they then approach the client, and that impacts everything.
If I can chime in on one thing that you said, I'm so thankful that you brought up the BDSM component, because in one of the things that I do, sexual health and just being able to have those conversations with patients with regards to the types of intercourse that they have, the numbers of partners, et cetera. It's all of these, again, normalizing types of things where you want to create that comfortable place for discussion. And the interesting thing is that when we do start talking more about individual specific sexual preferences, that's where you can begin to see, all right, do I need to establish that consent has been given from both of these individuals? Because again, when we discuss BDSM, sometimes there's a power submissive type of role player interchange that occurs in that sexual context. But when we remove it from the sexual context, is that power dynamic still there? And at that point, are we considering this as a form of interpersonal violence? Because it absolutely can be, if someone kind of coerces another individual into feeling this is an extension of that romanticism. So that's been something that's very, very fresh and new in my eyes. I would say over the past couple of years is really determining the nuances of, is this really a, not kink shaming or anything, is this kind of a kink type of thing? Or do I need to be worried if I see bruises on someone and they share with me that it was during rough intercourse? You know, again, the only thing I can do is hope that I ask the right questions and then create the environment that's going to let them come forward. But always, I think that we have to, it comes back to the conversation of consent, and that if you are engaging in these things, make sure that this discussion of consent has occurred, not just to a safe stop word or whatever along those lines, but before it even gets to that point, because it can be a really interesting and fine line.
And I'm glad you bring that up. And that's the consent is exactly the point I go to. And what I try to illustrate to audiences is that BDSM is some of the most consent-driven kink activity you can have. But I do agree with you too that it is complex. And knowing that consent in one sphere of life does not necessarily mean that is consent somewhere else. So by way of example, personal story, by way of example, I can appear to be very submissive in the bedroom, but all of you know me, I am not a submissive woman at all in any other part of my life. We have different parts of ourselves that we express in different areas of our life. And so that is so dead on about trying to explore some of those nuances, and thank you for that.
This has been such a rich discussion too, and I'm listening to all of this. And before we transition to our next question, I did want to also just kind of chime into this as well, because I feel like, and I don't think this is going to be surprising, obviously, to anyone on this panel tonight, but to some of our viewers, it actually might, they've never looked at it this way before. Like we're looking, I think a lot of times too, the way that this LGBTQ plus and violence has been politicized as a tool of power and control. And I think too, if we think about where some of this is also coming from in terms of creating these sort of spheres of silence and fear, and we have providers who don't give those services because they've been empowered in some way to see relationship violence in the LGBTQ plus community as common, right, or expected or deviant or whatever term label we want to put on it, to basically say we don't agree with it, henceforth we're not going to help, right, or create a space anywhere in this community for us to talk about it. And so it bothers me so much to see a population of individuals, like basically it's like 1 second you're almost given something that seems promising in terms of federal regulations or state regulations, but then the day after, all of a sudden, that's used against and said, well, we're going to give you this right, but we're going to take away this other right. And so I think it could get very confusing. And being a parent of 2 children who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community, now for several years of their life, I've seen this happen to them over and over again, where it's very confusing about who do I talk to, or where do I go? Do I say anything to anyone besides the folks in my sphere who I know are accepting of my relationship and accepting of me, right, and accepting of my partner? But do I say anything? How do I help this other person in my life? We could get off on a whole conversation about that, but I'm also talking about the power of control being structural as well. And again, I don't think that's surprising to any of us here, but the way that it's manipulated a lot of the time, especially recently in our country, has, I think, created just incredible barriers for the conversations we're willing to have and where service providers are and their willingness and empowerment to either offer or take away these as well. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Maybe we'll get back to it in further discussion, but Jazz,
I can just
yeah.
add one more thing to that. I'm right there with you. Yes. And again, as you pointed out, it's not a surprise to us, but one of the things that I'm really happy about is every fall I do participate and teach a selected course within the College of Medicine with regards to a LGBTQ plus health promotion. And one of the things that we're seeing across the United States is education of medical students. The medical students are actually wanting more LGBTQ plus education within their structured medical school training programs. And so I'm happy to be a part of what's starting here at Texas A&M in our College of Medicine. But this is just a very 4-week, 12-hour just run that I'm kind of pummeling into people. But that movement is taking place across the nation, and there are curricula that are being developed both within Texas A&M for an interprofessional LGBTQ plus curricular model. But I feel like I'm seeing the trend with future physicians of America that we're going to see some of these individuals that do play important roles in some of these structural and political venues for making policy and paving the way for kind of bridging some of these gaps in healthcare disparities. I feel like it's going to take more time, obviously, but I'm more hopeful that it's happening, and it's already in its infancy here at A&M. So I think that our Aggie doctors, as well as doctors across the United States, are paving the way and creating that voice before they're even out on the floors of hospitals or clinics. So I'm really optimistic in that regard. So.
Ooh, okay, we all just gonna take a deep breath because my brain is going because y'all, okay. So we actually have a question. And so I'm gonna save this question just to the end of this section because I think we're gonna get to it. So someone asked, what are the resources that we can provide here in this community that will prevent victims from having to go to Austin or Houston to get help. And so I think as we talk through these questions, it's going to come up organically. But if it doesn't, I will ask it at the end of this section, and we'll all chime in. Okay. All right. So our next question, and Frankie knows this about me. I think this is a passion, a small passion of mine. So let's talk about Black trans women. So we know that Black trans women, specifically in Texas, are experiencing violence at alarming rates. How do we bring more awareness to this issue? And I think, so we're talking about Black women in particular, but I think just thinking about trans women in general, also of just the violence that they're experiencing, and how do we have those conversations? How do we bring awareness to it? And then what type of resources and support are out there for those folks that are in that community in particular? Because I think we are not really doing a good job across the board supporting our trans folks in general when it comes to dating and domestic violence. And so this is a question as a practitioner of how can I help, as well as our viewers being able to really learn and help, and also reducing that stigma that's out there too. I think the stigma piece is huge, and people sometimes don't even want to have conversations. And of course that frustrates me, but whoever wants to answer that, please go for it.
So I think events like these, having educational moments where we tie that in. I know me and Katrina have lectured and taught together, and we bring up the trans murder rate, which is staggering. We specifically highlight that trans women of color are vastly overrepresented in those numbers. We do an event here for Trans Day of Remembrance on November 20th, where we read the names, but we also read how people are murdered. And so it's important, I think, to acknowledge not only that we are losing people, but we are losing people in very violent ways. It's about acknowledging our history. We teach about Stonewall, like everyone teaches about Stonewall, right? Like if you get anywhere into like LGBT stuff, it's like Stonewall's the first thing. And we mention Marsha P. Johnson, but how many folks continue on to mention that she was murdered in the 1990s after Pride and stuff? And so it is remembering that there's a history there too. This isn't a recent thing that just started happening. This is something that has historically been going on for quite a long time. So for me, it's about the educational component of things. It's just bringing awareness to this issue and stuff. And it was mentioned previously about having straight men who love trans women. And so that aspect of like being in the closet being weaponized and stuff. And so it's about normalizing those experiences and making sure that when things like that happen, we see the red flags right away and can help people and stuff. So much of the time, domestic violence education is cisgendered and heterosexual, and so people don't realize the trans aspects that are going on there. And so it's having examples in sessions like Green Dot and Step and Stand Up that are specifically tailored for trans women and trans women of color.
I think I love what you said, and I love what you do at A&M as well. One of the things that jumps out to me is the word education, and that can look so different depending on the audience, the individual themselves. And, there's a whole lot of educational theory. I won't bore people about it, but especially in terms of overall health and health readiness, if we take that same type of lens and try to use it in this context, what are we ready to learn? What are we ready to, how are we wanting to dig into this? Because everything that Frankie just shared is so pertinent. Those conversations, but they can be difficult conversations. And for more seasoned individuals, it's very heavy. And, once you get a taste of that, it can be something that's just like, oh, now I feel like everything that's associated with trans lives mattering is just so oppressive and sad. But that's not the case. That's not the life, and that's not how we want to remember these individuals either. But it is a very important part of their story, and a very important part of us being able to learn and move and create positive change. But I think that that's one of the things for people that are wanting to make a difference or wanting to learn more or create awareness is get creative. You may not know a trans individual, or if you do know a trans individual, you may not know a Black trans individual. And always be mindful that not everyone wants to be your teacher or your poster child as well. So, but the great thing is, when I say be creative, YouTube is out there with tons of people that want to share their stories. They are also wanting you to click the like, subscribe, hit the bell, all of that other stuff, but they're wanting to share their stories. And I think that's a great introduction because you'll get this personalized experience from someone that does want to be a voice. But it's also not going to be just rosy, peachy. I've never met a single person, cis, trans, otherwise, doesn't matter. I've never met anyone that has just had the crystal perfect life. But I think that that's one way to get the exposure and kind of create that idea of, okay, I know that this is an issue, and then forge your way into some of these more deep, historically rooted and firmly rooted aspects of the history as well that have kind of gotten us to where we are. Because that education, again, we have to step back and say this is one individual's lived experience and it does not transfer among all individuals. But the more exposure that we get, the more familiarity is going to be one way that we're helping, you know, somebody that posted something on YouTube, they're creating awareness with their story. We're actually able to kind of help perpetuate and share that even further. So the education piece is important. You don't have to sign up for a specific class. Find other ways to also.
I just kind of want to second everything that you both said, and thank you so much. I just know that I want to speak from the diaspora, the Black community, that there is still some blurred lines on really just recognizing Black trans women in their existence at all. So given that aspect, really realizing that, you know, your fight is my fight and that we are all one and that we are all, you know, one and the same is something that really needs to be, I think personally, some of the root of how we do begin to advocate and to stop, you know, the murders and different things that are going on within Black trans lives. I mean, like between circles of me growing up and also still today, there's just such a blurred line. It's such a blurred line that gets crossed gets crossed a lot. That gets crossed a lot, and that really needs to be obliterated to start all types of things. So yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I wanted to go back to what Frankie was saying and mention that Transgender Day of Remembrance is one of these. It happens November 20th of every year. We are currently putting together, Frankie and I and other partners in the community, a great virtual program for it and a great discussion afterwards. And attending one of those things can be hard, can expose uncomfortable history. For instance, last year there were over 300 murders. They were almost all trans people of color. There was one man, there was one white woman, and that was it in over 300. So that's coming up. That's one way. And that's a hard thing to go through. When the wife I had that has deceased was with me, the first one she went through, she was immediately afraid for my safety in my life after going to one of these because of the reality she saw. But it also speaks, besides speaking about death, it speaks beautifully to our resilience and the resilience of our trans women of color, our trans people of color, to continue to go on despite these things. And that's just so beautiful. In terms of some solutions that I can give, one, we need more inclusive peer support groups. So Pride offers a support group. It needs to be more inclusive, and that's always a struggle to get people in. We need more of that. We need more groups in more places. You know, we need them in the Black churches. We need them in the Hispanic neighborhoods. We need them everywhere. I also think that we need to be honest and look at sex work and being more honest and fair and inclusive about our sex workers. The fact is, so many of us that are trans are doing sex work. So many of us that are disabled are doing sex work because that's how you have to survive. You cannot get a job in other ways, in many ways. So considering that reality in all we do in regard to policy and community building, and we also have to get back to that law enforcement sort of thing and change the main paradigm of how law enforcement looks at these issues. And we're working on that. But as Matt alluded to with other topics, it takes time, and it takes continual work.
I want to jump in on a solution as well. And I think we need to see more trans stories represented in the media and other places. And we need more trans actors and trans actors of color who are portraying those. So much of the time, it's cisgendered heterosexual folks who are playing those roles, and that fight plays into a dangerous stereotype that it's just a man in a dress. And so I think the more we can have more positive stories and stories in general about folks' lives from the community, the more you can normalize and make things more aware, because you may not know someone, or you may not be aware that you know trans folks. And so by having those representations through media and other stuff, we can introduce people, and so they're more welcoming and accepting and breaking down barriers.
Well, that was powerful. And my, you know, me and Denise are over here misty eyed because that's us. And of course we're like, okay, how can we help? Because that's what we are. And I think it's important to know as an ally, it's wonderful for you to stand in the gap, but it's always my business to amplify those stories and amplify those voices. And for me, that's important right here in this moment to just sit in that, because you all shared, and you definitely gave us enough with that. And so I'm not going to say anything else. Dr. Kasafi.
Thank you for saying the word resilience, because that was the powerful moment that kept the tears off the screen on Facebook Live. But if I emote, I emote. I stopped apologizing for that a long time ago. So for the folks who are watching, I do not apologize for my emotions. But so we had a couple of other questions at the end, which y'all have done such a good job of talking about already. So I'm going to preface it by saying that the next set of questions, we're talking a little bit about how we know that individuals who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community may likely experience stigma, bias, or discrimination when seeking support, right? Whether that's from medical professionals, whether it's from law enforcement, whether it's from other crisis service agencies in certain parts, in certain communities that are not equipped, right? So in that regard, I'm going to ask you all, I'm going to take a couple of pieces. One is from the question that we received through the Google form, and the other two, so whatever parts you want to comment on with it, it's not a 3-part question for everyone, but considering that conversation that we've had so far in terms of potential discrimination, lack of resources, having to travel far distances to get to resources. So one question is, what are ways that you or your agency have worked to prepare folks to access services? Another would be in terms of safety planning. So how does that look for individuals who identify as LGBTQ+? And then going to the question that we received, what are the resources here in the community so that someone doesn't have to figure out how to get to Dallas or Austin or Houston or San Antonio, et cetera. So I'm going to kind of throw those all out to you so we can kind of tackle some of those things with resources and safety planning.
Thank you for doing that. You know, we cannot do safety planning if the resources we have are not LGBT friendly or LGBT conscious of LGBT realities, or sideline them. So for instance, we cannot have domestic violence shelters that for trans women give them a voucher to go to a hotel instead of protecting them in the space that is safe, because you can't have trans women and regular women together. We also have to, we really have to, one of the things I always say about SARC is we are trying to make it better by flipping the script of the environment we create. Because the community, as Dr. Hoffman mentioned earlier, in terms of, you know, it's not just one, it's one person, it's not everyone. Well, the community doesn't see it that way. It sees one bad experience, and that's told over and over and over again. And you really can't silence that story. Instead, what you have to do is provide an alternate story of good behavior and hope that it gets replicated as well. And And I think that's what we have to do in all our organizations. It's the reason that I have given the LGBT training that I have at SARC, in my hope that we can change that organization and make that little droplet in this community. And of course, Pride Community Center, I'm always, as all of you know, I love doing trainings on working with trans clients. If any agency, anyone needs that, I'm not the only one, but there is training here locally to take advantage of.
So I'm just gonna shout out Chicago really, really quickly. I'm sorry, because I know everybody's from Texas, so let me just get a little Chicago out the way. Given that Howard Brown is one of our leading organizations within the LGBTQ circuit for holistic care and different things, they have wonderful programs for domestic violence and different things, and also other services that they offer for behavioral counseling and different things like that. So I know the caucus ourselves, I'll get into a little bit later, but we are working on a green book ourselves to kind of scour for more different resources and other things that we have out there. But Howard Brown is a huge one for us out here in Chicago. So Texas, take it away.
I think the thing I would add is the local network is super important. Knowing who is where. So Katie's association with SARC is definitely a really, really big one, because one of the things that we do see is that at any given point in time, the way that things and resources may be aligned now can completely change. I just read an article this morning that talked about how a lot of our local nonprofits are running at less than 50% capacity because of the COVID pandemic and financial strain. So that's just one unanticipated thing that has hit our nonprofits. But the thing is that just because, as Katie had mentioned, the hotel, that voucher for an individual, that may not always be available. And so we sometimes have to get creative. The thing that I've unfortunately seen is that one way that a lot of these safety planning things may appear within the LGBTQ plus community is they may appear a bit more extreme in terms of the measures that have to be taken. Given, if we could have an individual that is in a dangerous home environment, in order for them to be removed from it, if there's nothing immediately available, that individual may have to move across the state. They might have to just grasp at straws for resources that may be strong resources, maybe like in their own personal network, but they also might just be anyone that's able to take them in. Maybe they're going to have to scrounge up money somehow to get a bus to go somewhere. So there are really, really dramatic or extreme types of scenarios that individuals might have to just take advantage of because it's the only thing that's available to them, given the set of circumstances at any given point in time. And I can get all nerdy talking about policy models and the way that things shift and change at any given point in time to affect these things, but I won't. The biggest thing is as much as we can to stay in the loop. So I know in one specific instance, I reached out to people that had me contacting Katrina. I was in the loop with figuring out how the A&M Resource Center Pride Center might have been able to assist someone that was a student, but wasn't an A&M student. And so, we have a network of individuals that if we can't do something, we know people. And so I think that one of the best things, especially locally, is if there is a need, start with the Pride Center. It's really a great place to start because if anything, go there. If they're not able to help, they'll be able to branch out and just phones will be ringing, texts will be buzzing. We'll be able to try to gather resources. We're small but mighty.
I wanted to touch a little bit about the emergency planning and echo everything that was said, right? When folks come in, we do a lot of that. I think more in terms of the family aspect of things, like what happens if I get outed? How do I, and not coming from this is what's definitely going to happen, like you're going to be cut off, but how do we ease into that situation of figuring out what parental reactions might be. And I wanted to shout out some of our resources that are available to students on campus. Rick in Student Legal Services knows the legal ins and outs of like, you know, your debit card and credit card can be taken away if parents are on there. Your car can be taken away, laptops, all sorts of things that, again, I'm sitting here and like those sound like luxury items, but those are the ways people get out of situations. Like a car is not a luxury when you are in College Station, Texas, and that is your mode of transportation, right? And so thinking about those sorts of things, we have people like Rick who is free to students. He can't legally represent you, but he can help you think through the process of like, how do I make sure that I'm in a good place? And then Student Assistance Services, which is an office in the Dean's Office of the Dean of Student Life that we all work with at Texas A&M, Jasmine and Dr. Christofi and myself, and they have emergency funds that go through the institution. So if folks need to like get away and like get rent or something for a one-time thing, those funds are available. And I mean, with the pandemic and stuff, funding changes as has been mentioned, but if you need to pay rent for a month or something, like those are options that can be available. We do have things like Stark and Phoebe's Home in the area, but Phoebe's Home, which is our women's shelter, is a short-term solution. It is 30 days. And so that is a very, very short amount of time for you to figure out your life when you're in an emotionally draining situation. And so just shouting out some of the other resources that can be a part of emergency planning and thinking through sort of how do I get away from folks. And something else, like I've talked about family a lot, but if you have been outed or if you're out and you're no longer a part of your family and your partner is your family, but then there becomes an abusive element and you need to get out of them, like they may have signed stuff for you, right? Like they may be on loans or on rent, property, stuff like that. And so it's thinking through those legal situations that someone like Rick can really be helpful for. Like if you need to get out of a lease because you're in a domestic violence situation or something like that wasn't something I had thought through till Rick had brought it up, right? And you're like, oh yeah, like that's a thing, right? And so there's a whole lot of things that go into that emergency planning that might not mean I seek resources, but it's how do I like get out of a situation.
Before we move on, please, I will be like in huge trouble if I do not say Senator Halstead. Also, just for Chicagoland, they do also have all types. They have a wonderful telephone service for all needs, but definitely for domestic violence and behavioral counseling, and also Broadway Youth Center. And since we just got off of Black Trans Women, Brave Space Alliance is an amazing. I mean, they're just growing. Love them, and they're doing amazing work with all type of counseling and all types of needs as well. So they're this one.
All right, y'all. So I want to thank y'all for answering my questions. So Jackson was overzealous with the questions I wrote, and so we're just gonna be transparent. I really thought that we were gonna get to y'all individual questions, and so I'm gonna apologize first of all because y'all have prepared to answer my questions. So that's the first thing. So I want to tell y'all sorry because we do have 7 minutes left, and y'all are great. So when I have another panel for Stalking Awareness Month or Sexual Assault Awareness Month, just remember the little people over here if I need y'all to come back. But what I want you all to do in our last 7 minutes that we have, I want each one of you to just share one thing, maybe two, that before leaving this panel that you want someone to know. If someone only catches the last 7 minutes of this panel, what is something that you want people to glean or know about this community, the fight that we all should be engaging in to end power-based personal violence, or even things that your organization in particular is doing to support those impacted by dating and domestic violence? I work well under pressure. That is my strength. So there y'all go with the new question, and take your time. And Frankie, I'm sorry because I know you like to be prepared. So please don't yell at me later.
I think
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, I think really the main thing that I would want to say, it echoes something that Katrina had said earlier. Each and every one of us, regardless of how we identify or what our intersectionality looks like, we are resilient. And that is something that no one can take away from us. It's going to be there. And in situations of inner partner violence, domestic violence, however you call it, or however you feel or experience it, maybe the biggest thing to do first is seek out safety. You have to feel safe and have that physical safe element before you can start looking at healing. You have to have that one basic component of human instinctive protection, that safety component. Find it however it looks for you, and then regroup and know that you're resilient, because there are resources, there are people that care. There's a panel right here that is talking about how much we care, and you're resilient and you're going to make it.
So if you only hear this one thing, I want you to know that you are going to be believed. You are not crazy, that there is help out there. And if folks need it, to please reach out.
Don't beat yourself up. I was in all of us can talk about bad relationships we've been in, right? And I was in one that it wasn't till I volunteered at Phoebe's home, actually, that I saw a piece of paper, flags about relationships. And I'm like, oh, tick, 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 tick. So sometimes you find yourself in that moment and you don't know what's going on. You just know something is wrong, right? And you have to get out of it. And then later you're like, boy, I was an idiot. No, you weren't an idiot. You were human and you went through shit. And it's okay. It's normal. You don't beat yourself up about that. And you're not alone. As Matt and Frankie have both said, there are lots of resources. A lot of us in the community would be even willing to meet you publicly one-on-one if you want to just chat. Tons of resources. You're not in this alone.
This might sound very like movie based, but I really would charge everyone to definitely listen to your heart and yourself within these different situations that you're navigating through in life. I know that when it comes down to, you know, domestic violence or dealing with sexuality and different things like that, we have these interpersonal talks with ourselves where we acknowledge different things that are going on, different triggers, things that are new, things that are the same, things are different. Definitely just take in that moment. And I'll also say, just to pivot back from what everyone said, because I was going to say either one of the things that you all have said or double back twice. So yeah, I would say definitely just, you know, have those conversations with yourself and definitely listen to yourself in your heart during those moments of interpersonal conversations. So.
Dr. Kasafi, you wanted to add something, and then I'll wrap it up.
I do. So I'm not technically an invited panelist. I'm here by way of my position, but I was so looking forward to this panel. I've looked forward to all of them, but this in particular. And so I want to add something too. And I know a lot of us have seen that message going around on social media, especially for our young people, right? Our high schoolers coming straight into college, like you were in high school a year ago, or you've been at A&M for a couple of years now. You know, we've seen that thing about if your parents don't understand, there's somebody else kind of willing to kind of like, I'm your family now. It can be admittedly one of the hardest things to tell a parent or guardian, and kind of ramping yourself up to that and not knowing what the response is going to be. And if that response is negative, I think it's really important to know there are people who are willing to mentor you and love you and talk about how you feel and celebrate you, right? And give you the things that may give you like happiness and joy in the world when it seems like everything might feel like a wave against you, right? Structurally and socially. And so I'm a huge fan of the Trevor Project. If anyone is familiar with this resource, I've been following it for a number of years. I think it's really important to look at the intersection of mental health with a lot of the barriers that we talked about today, especially for our young people. And so I just kind of want to throw that out there as a plug, because I think it's incredibly important. I watched our oldest bonus child, that he's my bonus child, ramp up like we kind of already had an idea. We didn't want to call it out, but I'll never forget the day at 16, he was struggling so hard and came out and he's like, I've got something to tell you. And we were like, okay. And he's like, I'm gay. And we were like, we're glad that you know. We've known for a while. I'm like, good, you figured it out. I'm like, that's great. But I think the important thing is that buildup was so like, he didn't know. Even us as a family unit who's always been pretty open, wasn't sure. And so I think it's really important, you know, for a lot of individuals to, if you don't have that support, know that you can find it. It does exist in any community. So.
Absolutely. And so, y'all, first, I just want to tell you all thank you for being here with us tonight. We had amazing panelists that you can see their passion for their work, for their identities, and for the community as a whole. I also want to thank you all for not only sharing, but also creating space for your allies to sit in the space with you, to learn, to grow, to ask questions. When I wrote these questions, I was very intentional about not tokenizing anyone on this panel when I wrote questions. So a lot of the questions were based off of your jobs and the things that you do, because I know that as the Black woman in spaces, I'm never like, Jazz, give the Black opinion. I never want to be that person. And so what I realized is that was important for me not to do with y'all. I hope that we can continue to have these conversations, because this is truly just the tip of the iceberg. We could probably sit and talk about this all day long. And there are a few things in my life that I'm super passionate about, and this is one. And I think doing interpersonal violence prevention work, to leave out such an important community is not doing my job correctly. And so whatever I can do as an ally, also as a health promotion office to just amplify voices and support, we will continue to do. And just know for any of our LGBTQ folks that are watching, whether you're students, faculty, staff, community members, that we love and care about you. And we are here for you, and we will listen and we will support, and Jasmine will kick down doors if that's what I have to do. And so other than that, we are going to end our panel tonight. So thank you all for staying with us. We are just 2 minutes over, which is not too bad. I was trying to stay on time. I had a whole lot of questions, and hopefully we'll share those with you all sooner than later. But tomorrow we have a Green Dot training that's happening. So if you haven't signed up for that, feel free to sign up at greendot.tamu.edu. And then next week, join us same time, same place for our last community conversation. So this is our 5th panel of the month. Yes. And we will be talking about relationship violence and access to resources. So specifically talking about rural communities, thinking about our rural Aggies and the different things that they experience, and what happens when you don't have a Phoebe's Home or a SARC. What does that look like for you? Or you don't have wonderful, sane nurses that you can just go see. What does that look like for you? And so you all have a great night. Take care of yourself, and we will talk soon. And I'm signing off.